All right. Hello, and welcome back to Real Seekers, everybody. Today, I have a special treat. It's actually a follow-up show because I think last week, I forget when it was. I've done like five shows in like less than a week, so forgive me there. But I did a show with Jamie Castro and Andrew Loomis. On Andrew wanted to talk about politics, and I think we kind of covered the issue about Christian values. Where do they align up politically? And they kind of made the argument that it aligns mostly to the conservative end. And I think more or less I would kind of agree with that myself. But in response to that show, my friend Owen McDonald reached out to me and said, "Hey, hang on, Dale. Wait, this is not true. I would argue that Christian values are more aligned with the liberalism or the political left and that sort of thing." And he wanted a chance to make his case, which I agreed, and here we are today. So, yeah, Owen, I just want to turn it to you. Since this is your first time on Real Seekers, do you just want to introduce the audience as to who you are, a bit about your background, and maybe share some of your own faith or irreligious faith journey if you're willing.
Sure. Okay. Well, firstly, thank you for having me on, Dale. I'm Owen McDonald. I wouldn't say I'm particularly. I've got a YouTube channel where I have political discussions and sort of debates. And when I say debate, I mean there's a lot of people online who turn it into a bit of a shouting, nasty thing. I like to have nice, chill conversations, which hopefully we're gonna have today. But in terms of my own leanings, I wouldn't say I'm religious, but I'm certainly not anti-religion. I'm not someone that is against people of any faith. My family is, as with many British families, you've got some people who are religious, some people who aren't. It's the nature of the country, really. There's not like a set certain thing. But I certainly have spent a lot of time around religious people, and I've certainly spent a bit of time, looking into and thinking about religion critically and such. So I'm hoping this will be quite an interesting opportunity because it's always interesting seeing how so many different people, 2 billion Christians, right? And there's so many different perspectives. So hopefully this will be an interesting chat, and we'll enjoy airing out the differences.
For sure, yeah. And just kind of curious on the religion aspect. Have you? I noticed when I was checking out some of the content on your channel, you are primarily focused on the political end and speaking to people of all stripes. Have you dabbled in the field of Christian apologetics and arguments for the religions at all, or is that's just not your
Um,
main
I
interest?
wouldn't say I wouldn't say that's more my wheelhouse really. I more look at the political stuff. Um,
Cool.
I certainly have ideas about religion and such, but in my mind, someone can be religious, and that's sort of just not. It's like the person's actions are more important than
Hmm.
beliefs they have about God or whatever religion they have. So I don't mind if someone is a Christian or an atheist or whatever, as long as their actions in the real world and such are decent, right?
Fair enough. Fair enough. Awesome. All right. Well, with that said, let's get straight into the topic of politics. And I think the first place to I want to kind of start with you is something that I didn't ask with Jamie and Andrew and a fan, Brian with an I. Hey to Brian there. He kind of mentioned in the comments, we should have started by defining what is conservatism versus liberalism and that sort of thing. So I'm kind of curious about your take like
Okay.
properly define these things. What are these things in terms of a proper definition of what they are?
So that's a really interesting question, and I reckon no two people have exactly the same answers. When we think about it broadly, we sort of roughly align it to left-ish and right-ish. So, the idea that it's certainly in America, um, we should put our money and resources into looking out for the little guy and setting up programs and funding through the state various things to support people, say, who are less wealthy and less able to support themselves. But from and obviously conservatives would argue they do the same thing, right? Like they would argue that their maybe sort of more private industry led perspective would do the same thing, that the best way to support someone is to give them their own footholds to to support themselves and such. So I always think it's good to link it back to a broader sense of economics. Liberal um, can mean being gentle and relaxed and such. Like you might liberalize an economy, for instance, and you're saying deregulate it, give corporations the flexibility to act upon the market as they see fit. And you might also say be liberal in the sense of being relaxed about your social views. So lots of people have liberal attitudes towards sex and sexuality and gender and all sorts of topics that maybe 100 years ago had a different view. Whereas a conservative might say, no, we should conserve, literally in the name, conserve the social, political, etc. attitudes of 100 years ago, 150 years ago, or some previous time to now. They don't want to see the change that may come in the future. And so, as you can imagine, and I don't want to keep on going on because I know I'm speaking for a little bit of time, as you can imagine, different people are going to draw and mark out the areas differently because, what I think is a new step forward, someone else might think, okay, well, this is a bad change. And so it's very tricky to sort of point as you might a zebra or a lion and say, yes, this is a conservative, this is a liberal. Typically, I think if we're going to really to go back to your initial question, how are we going to sort of broadly define it in this conversation? Conservative aligns roughly with right-wing ideas about hierarchy and about what in society should be permitted to exist independently of any social critique. So, for instance, a conservative typically thinks that the economy shouldn't have any regulations or anything like that imposed upon it because they believe in the idea of free market capitalism, the idea that we have a system that should manage itself and the winners will go to the top and those who don't win need to try harder and basically have as little implementations or appendages put on the natural order of things. And then socially that means a worldview which maybe harks back to some previous point in time, usually one that maybe has less modern views on various marginalized groups. A liberal believes in more of the social stuff, social progress, gay marriage, equal rights and such, to maybe a greater degree than most conservatives do, but they will also likely, rather than sort of seeking difference from the aforementioned the free market and such, they want to put scaffolds and such on it to help those at the bottom and such. I would say I'm neither of those things. I'd say that I am much more left wing than both of them, and that my critiques lie actually with the organization of society through the capitalist system, which is the private ownership of resources, the aforementioned ability to um, be on the market and commodify anything, right? To turn anything potentially into a business avenue. I would say that society has reached a point where we're maybe needing to move beyond seeing every single element of society as a profitable resource. And so I would say that left wing and liberal aren't quite the same thing, but colloquially, because we live in a capitalist world, the left and the liberals have sort of, in many sort of minds, merged together. So they often get used interchangeably. I'm aware that's a very long-winded definition. I know that's a lot of words, but that's sort of roughly where I would say I am. It's quite a big thing, but
Yeah.
no, it's complicated.
I know it's interesting, and I like that. Okay, so like Jamie and Andrew, you're not necessarily tied down to any kind of like formal definition of classical liberalism. You recognize that these things can mean different things to different people, and there is sort of an evolution over time and that sort of thing as well. So we're obviously looking at kind of within a modern context what qualifies as such for us today. Um,
Yeah,
I'm so I guess I'm very interested. Obviously, you wanted to talk about how do Christian values overlap with these, and I guess we could start right away with the difficult question, where you kind of approach it from what I would see as sort of a radical perspective of like get rid of capitalism altogether, kind of thing. So like, what just out of curiosity, rather than me assume, like what is the alternative system you'd want to put in place? Would it be like a Marxist communist thing, or do you have something else in mind? Like, yeah, like what's
yeah,
the
okay,
alternative if we get rid of this?
yeah, okay. So it's a fair question, right? Um, so let's start with the capitalist thing, right? Like the idea that you go into town and there's a market and the things in life like food and water and housing and all those sort of just building blocks of society are items on the market to be bought and sold for a profit. Now, in an ideal world, if everyone sort of trades and everyone gets along and everyone has that sort of just, I've got something, someone else has something else, we swap it, we get, we're both happy.
Mhm.
Um, we live in a world where there's a massive disparity between those who have and those who don't have. And we might not notice it straight away because we're maybe lucky to live in countries that have mostly most of their people able to read and write and living in a house or some shelter of some kind. But the grind that many people have to go through to actually be able to make ends meet, afford their monthly rent, pay their bills and such, has become such a slog. At the same time as massive corporations are wealthier than pharaohs and kings ever have been. Just like you look at Amazon and such, and it's just such a just massive hoard of wealth. And so when I say I'm anti-capitalist and say I want change, I'm envisioning a system in which the labor of people who have worked in society and such, and everyone in society has some democratic say in what happens in that society. There's some elements of, okay, well, we have all contributed, and so in a way that's rational and gets, say, people who are experts in their field able to direct the resources. We're going to ensure everyone's got the things they basically need to survive and can manage things in society democratically. Now, I would say that falls under the label of socialist, but again, as with liberal and conservative, that term has a loaded history because there have been states in the past which have called themselves socialist and then done the not very nice things, right? Like lots of places have, in the same way that, say, North Korea calls itself a democracy, lots of states have called themselves socialist and then maybe not acted in a way that would fit that, what I've just described, people being in society democratically and having a say in what happens. Um, so in the same way that I would encourage critical analysis to that liberal and conservative terms. So when someone says they are socialist, they usually will be referring to what I've just described. And when it's a state calling itself socialist, that usually refers to when the government takes control of an economy, and that's not a government is not the same thing as the people in that society. So yeah, TLDR for my again another long-winded answer. TLDR is that I would say socialism is roughly the ballpark of where I am. But I'm also a pragmatist, so just any steps to the left for me are decent.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think so. When it comes to, there's obviously different things. I think in the show with Jamie and when they were talking about Christian values overlapping, they primarily were speaking culturally, but there is this element of the economy and the government's role on that front, and what are Christian values when it comes to business and that sort of thing. And so I would agree with you that I look, obviously there's a mix. Let's say fair capitalism didn't work out so well in the 1700s and 1800s. That there do need to be some regulations, right, to control things as simple as poison in food. So I think that's consistent with Christian values. I guess what I would say, yeah, it's just a question of degree is probably where the differences come in, right? To what extent do we want a government kind of interfering or monkeying around with the economy, especially when governments don't really have a good track record of kind of interfering. Even under socialism, I've heard a whole bunch of stuff about Mamdani and people are fleeing New York City. Obviously, I'm sure there's some exaggeration there, but there is truth as
That's
well.
definitely a bit.
I'm sorry.
um,
Okay,
I said definitely a little bit of exaggeration there, but
but
I would
there's
say
some
that.
truth, right? So go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
What was I going to say? Yeah, so the it's interesting that you say cultural and economic, right? Because they largely, whilst you're quite right, they are sort of distinct. I would say that um, both definitely link back to when I watched part of the video, like the Christian values that I'm thinking about, especially particularly in this section where I'm thinking about the idea that there's something wrong with one person having like millions and someone else having nothing. Goes back to what Jesus did, right? Like I remember when I was, when I first learned about the stories in the New Testament of Jesus, he basically went around critiquing society, right? He went to the rich men and said, "What are you doing? You've got all this stuff, and there's people right over there who have nothing." The story of um, the lady who gave her last penny to the church, and Jesus saying that person gave more than the rich men who were just pouring their millions into it. That one always stuck out to me, and it's a true one, right? Because the whole point is that just having loads and loads of stuff isn't really what you should be doing in society, and so. that to me aligns quite neatly with a left-wing perspective where we're trying to break down unjust hierarchies. And when I say an unjust hierarchy, that hierarchy obviously like is any sort of relationship where you sort of got people on top and below, right? Like I imagine a sports coach and an athlete is a just hierarchy because the sports coach is in charge and is helping that athlete become a better athlete. Um, and we would say that hierarchies in a capitalist system or a system where one person owns tons and tons of land and then like 1,000 people have to pay that person to survive at all by paying rent and stuff would be an unjust hierarchy because there's not outside of that person making money there's no real it's not like a justification for it. um and so the economic element of this I think is massively important because economy and the material needs of people shapes existence, right? Like for as much as culture exists, if people have to pay for food and drink and stuff, there's going to be some people who just can't do that because they've not got the means to. And if those means are controlled privately, if there's not some democracy over at least some elements of social resources, then we're going to see some hard times for some people. And so that's, I think, one of the main angles of critique that I would certainly bring to this conversation.
Yeah, so kind of listening to you, I think, first of all, bringing up biblical examples, I think you're correct. There are certain parables which are indicative of this principle of fairness, is what it comes down to. I think we would both agree and wholeheartedly agree that there needs to be a principle of fairness. Now, there's an interesting question. Well, how do you achieve that? And there may be a slight difference between conservatives. You seem to be going for an equality of outcome or taking steps to at least achieve something closer to that, whereas conservatives tend to, well, equality of opportunity. Elon Musk is as rich as he is because he's earned that. He's been motivated to achieve that. He's used other people, but he pays them a salary and stuff like that. So like there is this notion of equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity. And yeah, I'm just kind of curious, like where do we draw that line? Like, obviously, we do need to have some motivation for people that are more gifted. They're better earners to go out and use their full talents rather than just say, well, hey, if I'm just going to be making the same as Jim Bob Jones over there, then I'm just going to sit on my rumps like Jim and okay, I'll put the tire on the car and earn my money and go home. So like where do you think we kind of mitigate those two things?
Okay, so in that example, because we live in a world in which we need the money that we earn from our jobs to get by in the world. Of course, in our current economy, the person with the great ideas and stuff might not be as motivated if they're only going to earn the same amount as the guy doing the menial task. But there's two parts to that. Firstly, the person with the idea can still have the idea in a different system. They're still able to. It's not as though no one would have any innovation or any creativity just for the motivation of money. It's the fact that you need the money to survive that makes it so lucrative and makes it an incentive, right? Like if you didn't have to pay so much towards your food, rent, bills, transport, etc., you wouldn't maybe be as fussed about it. Like for as much as like the saying money can't buy happiness is true, but not when you need things to survive and they're behind a moneyed paywall, right? Like they're behind some arbitrary feature of our market. And secondly, even so, like Elon Musk is a good example, right? Because whilst he certainly, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a big fan of his, but for as much as he can have all these amazing ideas and stuff, and he can think all these things, or more appropriately, people who work for him can think things, and he can maybe sort of market it and such. He still needs other people's labor to have that realized, right? Like for as much as um, someone can say, "Oh yeah, I've got this great idea for a car or a rocket or whatever you want to, put as your example." You still need other people to help you to make that work. It's not like you're Superman. You can just sort of fly to the mine and fly around and build it all. You've got to have everyone cooperating in society to have that realized. And so our critique is sort of almost saying, because we need all this labor, because everyone in society, even if it's not as direct as literally being there, but through the sort of cooperation and education and all the things that make life happen, because everyone's part of that, we should all have some say in some elements of our lives, certainly more than Musk having billions and other people having none. And then to go back to your point about outcome and opportunity, the opportunity that someone like Elon Musk has, even when he started out, is far, far higher because, his family owned a diamond mine in South Africa, right? So already there's clearly a bit of an extra step that helps him, because obviously he wasn't as rich when he started as to where he is now. But without that massive leg up, because I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't know many diamond mine owners. It it does it gives you that extra hand, right? It gives you a bit more of a start. And so what we're saying is, of course, we want people to be able to go different directions in life. I mean, of course, it's important to have that sense of achievement, but it doesn't have to be like strictly on some capitalist economic like pay divide where some people aren't going to make it and then have a really bad life as a result of it. Just because you don't have the next innovation and can't market it doesn't mean you shouldn't have your material needs denied from you.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it comes down to the principle of fairness on the other end. Like, yeah, it's some of these salaries of these they're that's not fair that they get that much. Like, I don't think they deserve that. They could maybe give some of it up to pay a fair wage because if their employees are working and look, one job is not good enough to cover your bills and stuff like that, a full-time job, I'm talking here something's wrong with that. I think, if
Yeah.
people are working three jobs just to pay the bills, that's not right, kind of thing. So I would agree there does need to be a balance, and I think that is consistent with Jesus and the biblical teaching, right? Because he not only are there these parables there are also, for the Elon Musks and the rich, you do get heavenly rewards based on the service you provide to God and stuff like that. So everyone's equal in salvation, but there are also heavenly rewards, and there's the concept you will be punished according to your thing. So I think it's a balance is what we need to look for, and I think that's what the Bible would support as well. Just before I move on to like cultural things, would you agree that biblically speaking, there is also that principle of what I'm saying, where it does need to be a balance kind of thing? It's not just okay, we're living all at the same wage and stuff like that, and equality of outcome is absolute. We don't care about incentivizing equality of opportunity, or do you think that the Bible is just pure equality of outcome?
As there's lots of things written in the Bible, right? I think that you're right about balance. I would argue that the balance is very tipped at the moment, and that it needs a long way to come back to the actual sense of balance. I would say that for as much as it's important to be pragmatic and sort of think that we've got to sort of live in the moment and think about what we can do in the moment and such. The Firstly, the sense of tipping, like as we've just said, right? Like the vast wealth of someone like Musk versus someone who has three jobs and still is worrying about where their next paycheck's going and stuff, right? Like clearly there's a bit of stuff that needs to be equaled out and such.
Yeah.
Um, but that Jesus, for as much as we talk about balance, was very radical in his time and probably now as well. I mean, he did things which were literally things that condemned him to death in his time, right? Like his actions in terms of, I mean, we'll come on to culture in a second, but in terms of like wealth redistribution and literally saying, church is a place for community and worship, not a place where you put fancy statues and, and hoard wealth. Like I think that is something radical. And I think if we apply it to today, where lots of politicians are, say, sponsored by various corporations to write bills at the same time as their constituents are like chewing around the block at the food bank and stuff, like there's clearly something that's very pertinent about those stories. And whilst again, I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm a religious person, but I like to be pragmatic. I think that if you're going to follow the teaching of the Bible, then yeah, you should be sort of thinking, okay, well, we've got to help people in society, even if it does clash with some of our normalized economic stuff. And what for as much as what you said about like salvation in heaven and such, obviously, everyone's fine to believe that if they like, but we also need to sort of think about, okay, we're humans right now. What can we do tangibly now to make things better for people? In the same way that when, for as much as Jesus in the Bible, he resurrected and went to heaven and such, but he also did things in the here and now, right? Or well, the here and now for Roman times and such. But he acted in the present day, so in his present. So I think that that would be a lesson for me as well. Like, if you're going to take something from it, seize the day almost, which is ironic because that's saying from Caesar, but it's
Absolutely.
take action.
Yeah, no, I agree fully with what you're saying. Look, the charity was invented by Christians, so this is absolutely a Christian value. God expects people to take care of each other and to love each other and to do the best with the resources they have. If you are in a position where you have more resources or you're in a better position to help, more is expected of you, kind of,
Yeah,
right? And but
I mean,
again,
I suppose the my response to that then, because like, charity is good, but in the same way that prevention is better than cure, it's thinking, okay, well, it's not as though we're saying every single wealthy person is some like Scrooge McDuck type billionaire evil figure who plots and schemes to kill off the poor. It's because of the nature of our economy, where you're incentivized to keep on making money. Of course, they're going to want to keep on getting wealthier and wealthier because if they don't, then if people at Ford don't make as many cars and sell them for as much as they can, then they're going to be beaten out by Dodge and Chevrolet and Chrysler and such. So of course they're incentivized to keep on trying to push their profits up at the expense of everyone else. So that's why we're saying if we democratize our economy and maybe, I mean, obviously that's my long-term, socialist stuff, but even just like pragmatically, just taking a few steps to the left and saying, okay, we've had quite a long time of neoliberal, deregulated, lack of intervention economy. Let's do a bit more to say, okay, there's a bit of a limit now. We're going to put more money back and resources back into public hands and democratize things, which is an intermediary, which again I would say probably needs to be a bit further. But I'm a pragmatist. I think certainly in a country like America, there's a big window to do something good for the public that doesn't have to come through some business incentive or charity. But no, you were going to go on to culture. You were going to say something about you were going to go
sure.
on to the next topic. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to switch gears to cultural aspects as well, kind of thing. But yeah, I did have one last question on the economic end, kind of thing.
Yeah, sure.
It's about your notion of democratizing the economy. Not, so that sounds great, but here's the problem I would have with doing that full on, as opposed is look, it's impossible to democratize it in the sense of an absolute democracy like Athens, right? We have a representational democracy for a reason. And the representatives that we elect are horribly corrupt. They're just, Nancy Pelosi and her stock options. Same with on the right side. These people abuse their power to enrich themselves and stuff like that. So I'm just wondering about the practicality of let's say we try to enact your plan of full on democratizing the economy. Great. So now Elon Musk and the private billionaires, they're going to be making a little bit less, but it's not going to be going to me. It's going to be going to Nancy Pelosi's retirement funds and to, Chuck Schumer and Lindsey Graham and all these guys, kind of thing. So like, how do we prevent the corruption if we're democratizing it to our representatives?
It's a good question. I think that when we're talking about democratizing a society, we're not just I think one of the things that people think when we have, anti-capitalist sentiment is that we're literally taking what exists now and just handing it over to the government, and then that is the extent of it. And that's definitely not. I'm not going to sit here and tell you Democrats are some savior, like heroic party. I'm certainly to their left. I'm not going to. Whilst I would definitely focus on the GOP as the source of current problems. There's no love for the Democrat Party from me. What we're saying is that governments are also part of that democratizing process, right? Democratizing process, because how we control resources is not democratic if it's through a system as Byzantine and bizarre as the management of government as it is currently. So, for one, if you remove the massive wealth in society being in such small hands, or such a small proportion of people, you've also removed the ability to, as we see now, lobby and buy politicians.
Hmm.
So the incentive of someone going into politics today, where there's a clear moneyed element to it, is also taken away by the democratizing of society because why would you're not if you're not going to get $1 million in the future for writing a corporate friendly bill, why would you do it? And because you've improved that democratic process where you've got more accountability, where the sectors of the society have more input from people actually working in the fields, right? So one of the problems is that, say, like in the current Trump administration, you've got people in charge of like education who aren't teachers. You've got people in charge of agriculture who are on the board of some massive corporation, but have never set foot on a farm, have no idea what actually goes into the production of food, and let alone the thousands of laborers who are actually on these farms. Like one of the like all the immigrants, for instance, who work on these farms, who've been massively mistreated by ICE and such, who the farms can't function without them, and they're being chased away by an out of control agency, right? Like, or another one, um, the postal service, right? Like where you've got people try making up all these scare stories about it when the actual people working in the field aren't being paid enough and aren't treated properly. So democratizing it isn't just sort of giving it to the government as like a sort of scary big figure. It's saying, okay, how can we involve the people in these industries in the regular decision making? And obviously that's like through experts, and it's not just like it's not like it's just like, oh, Bob the cook is now in charge of every single food item in the country. Like it's something that is still, there's still like a level of accountability and a level of experts move up and have more say and such, but it still involves people in a manner that lets them get work together and such. And so to come back to your it wouldn't be you getting the billions back, it would be someone like a Pelosi or anyone sort of in government. That wouldn't be happening because you would be, for one, no one's going to have like just $1 billion just sat to themselves. But for two, you are involved in, I mean, I don't know what industry you work in, but you're, there's some element of a link between you and your labor and the produce of that labor through the means of your industry. So, like for instance, if you were someone who worked in a factory plant, making cars, instead of the owner of Ford having a nice fancy yacht somewhere in the Mediterranean and you having to pay an extortionate electricity bill, the direction of the materials and such is somewhat controlled by you. You've got a vote, maybe you've got a discussion you can have, and critically, things like water, rent, education, they're not priced off. So you've got more ability to participate in society because you aren't putting so much money straight into a few material needs, but the same people that make $1 billion are also controlling. So yeah, it's a wholesale societal shift, and it's one that admittedly, it is a lot to imagine from where we are now, but through pushing left and even in small steps, I believe that it is possible in the future, and it's certainly if we will work for it. But yeah, that was a bit of a tangent, and you can ask your question about culture now if you'd like to.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So when it comes to cultural and moral things, I think this is primarily what I was talking about with Jamie and Andrew, where they see this overlap between conservatism values and Christian values. And I just want to start by asking you one something that we didn't address, if you don't mind, but one that I think is
Of
really
course,
important, and I think it actually violates an essential Christian value. And that comes down to the notion of atonement of sin and forgiveness of that sin, right? Once somebody repents, you forgive them for their sins in actuality. And in terms of the modern political landscape, so using liberalism and conservatism in not the proper definitions, but just sort of applying it, like people on the left through things like critical race theory and reparations and these no like indigenous land rights, which has gone to I don't know if you know what's going on in Canada. It's an absurd degree, like literally in the province of BC, to appease, past sins and stuff like that. The government says Indian land rights are more trump private property rights in the province of BC. That is insane. Like the real estate markets are going down. Banks are not renewing mortgages now. It's causing chaos. But anyways, my point here, the point I want to ask you about is there's this value of actually forgiving people when they have taken actions, they repent, and the government has officially apologized and apologized and apologized for these past sins, and they've even taken measures, right? They have paid the victims, the actual victims of some of these racist policies or sexist policies, whatever it is, these discriminatory practices. It should be over and done with. But instead, we don't know. It's this constant, everyone needs to keep paying, keep apologizing, keep doing this. And not only that, the people being punished aren't the original people that actually committed the sin. It's, me. It's people like me that wasn't even born when this stuff was going on or stuff like that. So I think it violates the biblical principle of number one, the one who does the sin ought to be the one who pays the thing. And once genuine repentance is given, you forgive, you let it go, and we move on to a better place. So what's your take on that? I do think that's an inconsistency, at least with how the modern left is practically behaving with these doctrines of reparations and constant appeasing and stuff like that.
Okay. So the phrase you said just then, genuine repentance, I think is the key bit here, genuine being the key word. Um, and to do that, I suppose there's a little bit of a thought experiment that I'd like to explore a little bit with you to try and answer this question. Imagine if I'm trying to imagine you got a nice house somewhere, you got like just a place you call home, right? And then one day, a big bulldozer comes and just steamrolls it over, and does so with the whole street actually. And you're like, what's going on? And you and your family go outside, and some guy in a Rolls Royce is there, and he says, "Oh, this is my new freeway. I'm just building this just right here. It's a perfect place for it." And they've actually bought the land, right? Without anyone telling you, they've done this and just put a massive highway, motorway, right where your house was. And so you like, "Oh, where am I going to go? What's going to happen to my stuff?" And he's like, well, that's you to decide. That's your quandary. That's your pejorative. Um, and so after like a decade passes where you've had to just like find somewhere else to go. A decade later, this guy's son's now in charge of the company. And he's like, yeah, I hold my hands up. That was a bit shitty of me. I wasn't very nice then. I'm sorry. Does that really equal? And yeah, maybe they when you're like, well, this isn't really much. They say, oh, don't worry, I'll write you a check, and they toss $100 your way. Does that quite equate to firstly the actual traumatic incident of your house just being like obliterated and a big motorway being put there? And secondly, the financial difference between you having to scramble around trying to put your life back together again, and this guy who's made maybe like $1 million from probably more than that from putting a motorway there.
Mhm.
Would an apology in the form of just some maybe a platitude, and if you're lucky, some fraction of the millions made since they put the motorway there equate to a proper
Well,
apology,
Uh, so,
atonement?
so, so no, I think it depends on the circumstances, but look, expropriation is legal, at least here in Canada, and I would imagine in the US. And the way it works, or it's supposed to work, what I would think is the fair thing is that, okay, if we genuinely need this land to build a highway for the common good, that's cool. That trumps my private property rights. But you are supposed to receive fair market value. That's the law in Canada, at least. Again, I don't know the US or the UK or anything like that, but that's the way it works here. The government and or can deem, okay, this land needs to be used for this public utility or this roadway or whatever it is. And as long as they pay you fair market value. So in your example, if somebody is genuinely taking my land and building this highway and they're just paying me, what was it, $100. That,
Yeah, and after the fact as well, like not up front. Like it comes, you get the $100 in a decade time when the original guy's son has taken over the corporation.
yeah. So I think I would accept the apology if I deem that it's genuine. I would say, okay, I'm glad you're repentant. But if you're in the position, a true repentance, you do have to try your best to make good on the damage you've caused. So I would expect fair market value plus interest. Again, assuming he's rich, he can afford all of that without undue hardship and stuff. That's the solution. You would repent, you would apologize for the past sins, and you would make restitution to whatever degree you can without creating undue hardship.
Yeah. But then two things. I mean, firstly, in my example, you got $100 just from a check from this guy.
Yeah.
Um, and secondly, would you say that even if, for as much as, they can say sorry, they still did it, right? Like they still, without warning, bulldozed your home, said, they didn't care about, they didn't present any documentation or anything, they just did it, claimed they had the right to, and then 10 years later, you got some half-hearted apology and a cheap check for like a multi-millionaire. Like
Oh, okay.
you
So
can agree that wouldn't be an example of genuine repentance. Right? That wouldn't be something that's genuinely.
yeah, yeah. Well, if you're telling me they don't mean it, then yeah, of course, that's not
Well, I
genuine.
mean, they may genuinely mean it. That guy may, the guy's son may genuinely think, yeah, that was a bit rubbish, but all you've got to show for all of this ordeal is an $100 check from, a still very wealthy person who made their money through destroying you and your neighbor as well. I like all the people in your street as well. It's not just you who's been
Well,
forcibly displaced.
so let me, I guess, let me answer it this way because I already said it's all else being equal, like assuming he can afford other things without creating undue hardship and all, it's not good enough. I would admit that. I would expect the fair market value. The genuine apology is good enough for me, and I think the Christian values you should say it is. But on the act of restitution, I would want more. Like $100 is not good enough. You need to give me fair market value plus interest for the 10 years kind of thing. Now, if it would cause undue hardship, and I think this is what's happening in with governments having to pay out. I mean, look, they're not giving $100; they're giving billions and billions and billions of dollars over and over and over again.
Wouldn't quite
To
say billions. And I mean, like you said earlier, right? Like it's not as though when they pledge X amount of money to some cause, they're giving it directly to the people on the ground who are, the
correct,
actual um the descendants of such. Sorry to cut you off then, but like the reason I make the analogy is because when we think about the past, you said past sins, right? Like it's not as though it's one or two people that have been as I said, like sort of inconvenienced, and then a decade later, it's active slavery and genocide and removal of, and it's not even as though that because in my example, right, the guy showed up and sort of just said, right, clear off, I'm bulldozing it. In this example, they just showed up and killed him off the land and such, and all and slavery and the forcible internment of these people, the disenfranchisement, the fact that they're only just now, centuries later, partially saying, yeah, maybe we should do something about this, and throwing the occasional sum of money, which is a fraction of the stuff they've made from benefiting from all of this, suggests to me that calling it genuine repentance is not really apt, right? Because it's not as though they're giving up the thing they benefited from it. Like if they were genuinely sorry and they wanted to show it and actually sort of have it have any weight, they'd also say, okay, well, you are now included in the benefits we have got from, make it that bulldozing and getting rid of your land and turning it into our stuff, right?
yeah, but I mean they are contribute participants and they've benefit. Look, African Americans have benefited from the slavery practice. They've been immensely harmed by it, but there have been
Um,
benefits that have come about historically that benefit them. Again,
oh,
I
not
would
from the
agree that it's
slavery though.
not. Sorry.
They haven't benefited from the slavery though, because that's the systemic racism is what of slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, etc. Like that didn't. You could have had all the things in America now without the slavery. Like it's like if
Yeah, yeah. You could. There's a counterfactual world where, for example, African Americans benefit from the roads, right? The government built roads, and that was used through some of the profit made from slavery. If you trace it all the way back in time, there's some loose causal connection there. So in that loose way, I'm not arguing that, oh yeah, well, slavery is good and therefore, African Americans should be grateful. No, I think overall there was more harm, a lot more harm caused by slavery. It was bad kind of thing, right? And it would have been a better world if we never had it, kind of thing,
mm,
at least from a moral perspective. Um, but yeah, like okay, with slavery, for example, though, here's where I would say everyone needs to get over it kind of thing. Like that, nobody alive today was a slave.
So
Um,
that's
no-
where
nobody
we bring
alive
in
today. Sorry.
the economy of it though is where we're sort of because the fact that no one's alive that was a slave, and I will asterisk that by
And
saying
no one was a
there are
slaver as well, at least
there
in the
there
US.
are people alive who are segregated, who were in segregation times, right? There are people alive who lived pre-civil rights era,
Right.
and the US's 13th Amendment does keep slavery legal as punishment for a crime, which means that anyone that has been incarcerated, in theory, experiences some of the same um, mindset and laws and such as what was seen previously. But we'll leave that for a second.
Sure.
The economy is critical because, like we were saying earlier, if we have the means to life via necessities and such denied to us, then we are unable to enjoy a truly free life, right? If you're constantly having to scrabble around chasing bills and trying to afford things that you need to survive, then you aren't going to have an enjoyable time. So when we have slavery and there's an entire racialized black people as slaves, um, black people then when black people aren't slaves anymore, there's still that massive economic disparity. All people that made money from slavery are now massively wealthy capitalists who control all the things in society that you need to live. And so the populations which have been, emancipated don't actually have the means to access it. And especially when it's not as though when slavery ends, everyone's heart just grows 3 times as big, like in the Grinch, and they're just like all smiling and happy and everyone gets along. The same
It should be.
racism. Sorry?
Oh, sorry to interrupt, but I'm arguing from the Christian perspective, it ought to be that is what
Oh, of
should
course,
happen.
but
Yeah.
of course of course people should realize, but they don't because it's an economic, it came from the capitalist system, right? Like the reason slavery existed in America and in, I'm not gonna, this isn't just like America. British Empire also used slavery. Many European empires used slavery. Some of them continued having their colonies long after America did. We're not turning this into like America is uniquely bad and evil. But the wealth that's been generated in America
Mhm.
is explicitly tied to this use of chattel slavery. And so the reason we can't just say, oh well, as Christians they should have their sin atoned and such is because they still clearly benefit and pass down their wealth to today, right? There's a link you can make between the corporations of today and many of their founders whose families owned slaves and who benefited from the mass exporting of cotton and other resources through slave labor. And so thinking about sort of fast forwarding to now, the reason there's an effort, or there has been an effort from you know left-leaning governments, I say left, liberal governments and such, to maybe talk about reparations and such, is because there is that understanding that yeah, actually, the reason there's wealth disparity for black people and there's another discrimination as well, like because across any marginalization, the reason that exists for like native populations and all of that is because for as much as you can write a law saying, yeah, we're going to ban slavery now and we're going to end the Jim Crow era segregation laws, there's still that element of capitalism which is racialized, but that means that black people have, as a collective, lower access and tacitly worse options in life through the economic inequity that exists in their spaces. As someone who is black myself, like it's not as though it's a literal like, oh, someone's at the door saying, no, you can't come in, you're black. But there's still that no, before we even touch the sort of cultural elements of racism, the fact that economically there's things that I didn't have at school, which many of my friends did, for instance, that can somewhat, if we trace back, go back to the fact that my family lived in a time in which there weren't resources in the places that my family would have lived because it's systemic. It's not as easy as just, oh, we've written a law and now all is well and they've said sorry, so it's okay. It's economic too. Um, and so that is why. I think it's a little, whilst the same wealth that slave owners had has can be just passed down and grown and turned into empires of fortunes and stuff. There's absolutely going to be a case for reparations, and I would say to add to that, the difference between my take on it and like a liberal take on it is that you got to address the systemic problem, which is that we have an undemocratic system built upon slavery, not just pouring money. And so the solution isn't just pouring money from X to Y, it's identifying the systemic problem. And obviously that does involve some wealth redistribution, but it's looking at a systemic thing.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, I had a response to some of what you said, but like I said, I'm interviewing you, so I'll let you get the last word on that. But yeah, okay, fair enough. Let me ask this then. Looking at these sort of values, obviously you heard the show with Jamie and Andrew, and I want to give you kind of a chance to address some of those values as well. So I think we covered things like what was the first thing? Tolerance, the issue of tolerance, where I think modern leftism or liberalism, whatever you want to call it, it is extremely intolerant compared to, what passes for the political right today, where we value things like freedom of speech and stuff. The results are like individualism versus collectivism. But let me just open it up to you because I know we have limited time. What were some of the things said on the show with Jamie and Andrew in terms of those values that you think actually no, the left wing values on that front are more coherent with Christianity?
Would you be able to remind me of just what some of the things they did say, touch on? Because it was a few days ago, but I've had a busy week, and
Yeah.
I didn't say I did. I did
Oh,
watch it, but it's blurring a little bit into one. Was there like a specific point that
um,
they?
yeah, there were several things. So, we talked about the issue of toleration of different lifestyles and value and opinions and stuff like that and beliefs. They say the left is more totalitarian. You agree with them or else we'll shut you down. Well, you'll get
Yes, yeah, no,
fired.
I remember that point. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, sorry, my mind was going a bit blank then for a moment.
No.
I would say that it's a little bit ironic personally because the so freedom of speech is interesting, right? Because if we truly want freedom of speech, we should be intolerant of the intolerant, if that makes sense, right? Like, so if someone um, comes and says, right, we're going to strip away the funding of universities, say that teach courses that I don't like, I would say that is a blatant attack on personal freedoms and educational freedoms and such. And that is been one of the characteristics of several Republican governments now for some time, and certainly this current Trump administration. Again, going back to what we were sort of saying earlier, the democratization of society is also the preservation of freedom of speech, right? Because if you want speech to truly be free and people to be able to say stuff without fear of recrimination, um, you need to have their material needs met. Because at the moment, say, if you fall foul of um, the guidelines of certain um, organizations and they happen to have political clout in government, then you stand to lose quite a lot, as we're seeing in lots of places. Um, Tolerance, I think, is an interesting word because you can use it in many ways. Like you can tolerate, say, a stubbed toe, but that doesn't mean that a stubbed toe is good. You can tolerate a cold, but it's better not to have a cold than to have one. And so I think what's happening is that they're confusing uh, left wing, or I mean, it's quite a broad use of the word left wing, I'd say, because if we're talking about like Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, then not really. I would say that's more, it's left wing in an American perspective where it's already quite a right wing country, right? But in terms of being critical of things like bigotry in society, I think that it's not good to tolerate those things. So of course there's going to like from a reductive point of view, like I think it's you couldn't call it intolerant, but like in the same way that a person shouldn't tolerate having unclean hands and so should wash them, people shouldn't tolerate things like bigotry and therefore should work to deconstruct it and to oppose it and such. And I would stress that if we're really thinking about what is intolerant, then the current Trump administration's intolerance for all manner of things is where I would sort of focus my energies personally. The principles of being a decent person, I think, are not quite reflected in the current administration, and thus would be my sort of spotlight for intolerance, I guess.
Okay. Okay. So I guess I have a couple follow-ups then. So like the problem with what you're saying, like it's okay to be intolerant with what's intolerant is it's this arbitrary, well, who gets to define what's intolerant versus not? What you find to be intolerant, I may find to be a tolerant attitude. Yes, it's different, but it's still, it's not intolerant or something like that. So there's that. So there's the first that issue, like who's the one getting to define intolerance? And depending, people were going way overboard. People were losing their jobs just 10 years ago for saying the mildest of things, right? Or for example,
I mean, go ahead, sorry.
yeah, I'll give you an example to work with, and then I have a second question based on people that actually are intolerant, and should we tolerate that? But so, for example, I would argue, as a Christian, I'm a Bible believing Christian, and I'm upfront, and I hope you'll tolerate me, but I have an opinion that the Bible teaches homosexuality is a sin. It is an immoral behavior. And I'm just saying that. But I tolerate people who disagree with me. I can be friends with you. I don't care if you're homosexual or not. I can be a friend with you. I can respect you. You're a human being and stuff like that. And it'll make no difference unless you ask me, okay, hey, Dale, what does the Bible say? Does the Bible teach that homosexuality is a sin? I'm going to say yes. That's what the Bible teaches. I'm going to be truthful. But someone would label that intolerant, and I could lose my job because of that. That is ridiculous. That's the problem there.
Well, I mean, to be fair, you like someone being gay is like not outside of your interpretation of the Bible's teachings on that. Like, there's no actual issue with it, right? So, there would be, there'd be concern that if you believe someone has some quality that is inherently wrong, that you'd be causing harm, right? Which is grounds to potentially like think about whether or not you'd be suitable for a position. But interestingly, the Bible, because many Christians would say actually the Bible doesn't teach that being gay is a sin. They would say that the passages that are used are applied to the wrong thing. Like, they're not talking about
Yes.
gay people in those passages, but people who have mistreated others in a different way, abuse and such. Um, and but there's many passages in the Bible which also teach about against things which aren't adhered to in the same way. The critical lens might say actually that people would not be fussed at all about LGBTQ people of any nature, but for the social organization of society. The fact that we lived in a patriarchal society that said men are in charge and women exist to have kids and support the house of a man means that if gay people exist, there's a difference from that. If someone says, well, actually, I prefer to,
Just
date men, then that breaks that model. And if you have invested a lot of time building such a model because you benefit from, for instance, half the population's labor being free, and you also benefit from people following your set teachings, then of course you're going to come out and say, well, yeah, gay people are evil and bad and such. So I
can,
think that, there's a clear, that's the reason sort of firstly to be critical of the world around us and such. But yeah, if you're coming out and saying gay people, that being gay is a sin, then ultimately that is something which isn't going to be tolerated because even if you say like, yeah, I'd still be friends with them and I'd still do all this, you're still assigning some negative quality to them, even if you word it in a nice way, right?
So what? Yeah, I mean, you're so in the first place. Okay, I just wanted to follow up with this. Let's pretend, for this sake of our, and again, I know the biblical scholars, but I won't get into a debate with you. Let's pretend I'm wrong, right? Let's pretend I think homosexuality is a sin. It's in fact not a sin, and guess what? I'm wrong in the Bible. The Bible teaches homosexuality between two consensual adults is a good thing. kind of thing. Just for the sake of argument, let's pretend I'm the free toleration means you have to tolerate me having wrong opinions. And I think what you're saying is it creates harm, and that's the basis for why we don't tolerate it. But I don't think that it does cause harm. That's ridiculous. I could say that it causes me harm anytime someone disagrees with me and says Christianity's not true or Jesus never existed. So should I be intolerant towards Jesus mythicists? Should it be against the law? Should they lose their jobs? No. You have to tolerate people saying things that might offend you personally or that
But
you might
it's a
disagree with.
different that's a different set of circumstances because in that example, yeah, everyone's got the right to have their own spiritual beliefs and religion and such, right?
Mhm.
But you're saying through what you just said there, that well, from what you said earlier, sorry, that a person being gay has some inherent sin, some inherent negative quality, which is different, right? Because
Well, no.
someone that says they have a different religious belief to you, that's their right, right? That's not something that invalidates you in some way. That's just a difference in spirituality and such. They're not saying, oh, Christians should be like have XYZ happen to them. The gay, given the way society has formed as well, because it's only a very short period of time in the modern West that LGBTQ people have had protections of any nature. Clearly, there's a connection between saying something like, "Oh, gay people are X, Y, Z," and then acting upon it. So even if, in the best of hearts, you would never do anything, saying that action connects to the history of bigotry against gay people, and thus is something that shouldn't be, like tolerated and such. And I would also say that I don't think the principle of tolerance is being applied correctly by you here because it's not as though being tolerant means you just are like able to permit everything and we're all just fine forever. Like, because like I said earlier,
Correct.
someone, yeah, you tolerate like if you went for a run, and I mean, I love athletics, right? Like I go running and afterwards my legs hurt because I've been running for like an hour or whatever.
Mhm.
But I tolerate that because that's my muscles having been torn, repairing themselves, and then I'm fitter and stronger. So that's a good example of good tolerance, where you're tolerating something that's good. I wouldn't tolerate wearing an awful pair of shoes that like have holes in, and then I get blisters all over my feet because they don't fit and such, right? Because there's no need for it. So in the same way that like I'm not even sure tolerance is a word, like, 'cause I'm not a Christian, I'm not religious, but I don't sit here and think, oh yeah, Christians are bad and evil and we shouldn't have them. Like, so when I say I'm not sure, I would say I tolerate Christians because tolerate's not the right word because I don't see any inherent negative, like, I've got people in my family who are Christian, right? So I don't, and there's Christians, as with everyone else, are part of society. So there's no like tolerance in a negative sense. Um, but
What do you mean by
I wouldn't.
sorry, go
Sorry.
ahead. I just wanted to, well, like, what do you mean by like we're ascribing an inherent bad? Because I think that's not what we're doing. Like it's not like, okay, when I say homosexuality is a sin, look, everybody sins, right? So
No,
heterosexuality
but
outside of
it's
marriage is a sin, right?
no,
So
but
I can say
it's
that.
but you would never say, oh, heterosexuality is a sin.
Of course I
Don't
do.
get married, a man and a woman.
I've
Sorry,
done shows on it. I've done shows
you
on it. Oh, so,
you've done
sorry. I'll get married, but I'm saying outside of marriage, I will condemn that as a sin equally with lying or stealing or homosexuality. They're all
so
sin.
you're no, but lying is bad anyway, right? Like if I said to you, "Oh, have this meal, it's delicious," and I've secretly put something disgusting in it, or like if you were allergic to something and I secretly slipped it into the meal, like that would be a lie. But that's not good to lie, right? Stealing, if I stole something from you, that would be bad because it's wrong to take. It's not nice, but there's no inherent thing wrong with gay people outside of interpretations of the Bible, which people have often, people used to justify like slavery and stuff with the Bible, and still do. People have often misinterpreted, or rather, used text to their own ideology and advantage, um, because it benefits them. So, in the same way that we can now recognize that when a preacher said that black people were justified slaves, as the Bible said, that person was a liar and was deliberately using the text to their own advantage. The same thing has happened with gay people because there's gay Christians, right? There's gay people all throughout society because they're just a natural part of life, as seen in every in across thousands of mammals. Being gay is just a default setting almost for people to exist in. And so we put when we hear a phrase like, "Oh, homosexuality is a sin," and it's put on the same level as murder and stealing and stuff, like of course there's something that isn't tolerable about that because it treats a person as having some negative quality just for existing as that person. There's no actual thing wrong happening outside of the interpretation that some people have given it, which doesn't really, it's not quite the same thing, right?
Well, see that's where you're kind of begging the question because for Christians like myself, we are saying, look, this is divine revelation, which equals testimonial evidence of an objective moral standard, right? Which is grounded in God for us. So again, from our perspective, you disagree with that. That's fine, but you don't just get to dismiss our views and say, well, we all know really I'm right. There is no objective moral standard that homosexuality is wrong. This is just something made up in the Bible. Like this is why it's good to have these dialogues. Like again, not in this debate, but in one of my other debates, I've debated atheists who will say, well, why should I care what the Bible says? How do you link what the Bible commands to an objective moral standard? And that can be debated. That's why we need toleration. We can discuss, and maybe I'm wrong about it. And through discussion, you'll prove that, oh, I have no proof that that's true, or maybe vice versa. So that's why I'm saying toleration. You have to understand where people Christians are coming from if we're talking about Christian values, and these aren't just made up words in a book. These represent objective moral standards. It really is wrong. It's causing harm. Uh,
But it's
but yeah,
like,
that's another debate.
but firstly, it's not like you say Christian values, but there's as you said earlier, there's 2 billion Christians, and they wouldn't all interpret the verses you've used in the same way, right? Like, for as much as you can say, "Oh, well, this means this," someone else says, "Well, no, they're actually talking about something else there. They're not actually referring to it then." And I mean, if we're being really critical, right? Like, there is, for as much as you can say, "Well, this book's important to us," like, it's not everyone is a Christian, so why should like society that you can't in the same way that you wouldn't be happy if I said, well, actually, I don't think there's any significance for this building, so we can just deconstruct this church and turn it into like, I don't know, just a park or something. Like clearly we should be thinking about what is but yeah, a healthy society isn't one in which we police people inherently for their existence, right? And gay people are part of that society. And so if we have things in society being said that, oh yes, it's a sin, it's evil, that isn't okay because ultimately, like, they have the right to exist. And so if we're and especially as what as well, I think the critical thing here too is that it's not as though like, oh, you have some personal belief which you hold, but it's just kept to yourself. That view, many of the Christians who say these things then write laws which actively get LGBTQ people killed. Like, many of these right now, there's people in government who hold the same belief that you do, that want LGBTQ people dead and are trying to get them eliminated from all forms of life, and do it in a way that maybe isn't as explicit as saying it outright, what there in many cases it is, but has the effect of removing them from various parts of society, claiming it's bad and perverse, and then having them marginalized from different places in society. So yeah, it's not. I don't think it's the case that you can just say, oh yeah, well, you have to tolerate the things I say just because it's Christian, because I'd say no, it's not, because it's not even there's no consensus across the 2 billion Christians on this idea. So we go back to they exist in society. They are as much a part of society as everyone else, and therefore should not have to face in the same way that a straight person shouldn't. If it were the other way around, and it was like, oh yes, you have a wife, so you can't come into this place and you can't access all the same stuff we can. That shouldn't be okay in this society, where LGBTQ people have faced the societal discrimination. They shouldn't have to tolerate the various forms of discrimination. And so, that view that, oh, it's a sin or whatever, is again going to be contested, and critically is going to be not tolerated in any setting beyond the minds in which it is produced, right?
So I guess just a couple things, and then I'll move on. I totally agree with you that, and it's a misunderstanding because the LGBTQ falsely, I would say, kind of equate, and it's a diminishment on their value as human beings, actually, and as persons. I see them as a person, but you said I'm denying their existence. I'm not. I'm denying the morally justified nature of their sexuality or their
Well,
sexual
which is another
proclivity.
way of saying it, right? Like what
You
is the
know,
sin that you're focusing on? Like what is the actual sin that what's
I don't even call it a sin that they're gay, kind of thing. It's not a sin on their part because they can't choose that. It's still wrong. It's not the proper
but
way God designed.
why though? Why?
It's not the way God designed human beings. God designed creatures to be male and female and within human sexuality only within the context of marriage. So even a man and
But
a woman.
what?
It's,
Why is that though? I mean, I don't think that's actually the case, right? Like,
you-
outside of
yeah, and I
according
will admit I
according to
can't.
so go ahead, sorry.
No problem. Sorry. And I will admit, I can't prove that what I'm saying is true in terms of the design argument outside of the Bible. I'm appealing to divine revelation there. And from there, if we were to debate it, it's just, okay, well, what evidence do you have that I should trust that the Bible is actually divine revelation or not? And from that, that's where Christian apologetics would come in, kind of thing, right? But so, yeah, I tolerate you disagreeing with me just because I quote that. That's fine.
But I mean, even like because like it would be very easy for me to get down that route, right? But I think I'm still thinking in terms of even just within the Bible, right? Like God designed Adam and Eve, but that doesn't necessitate, and it doesn't mean that everything else is wrong, right? That just means that God made Adam and Eve, the first two humans. That like in the same way that you know, Adam and Eve have been depicted in many different ways, depending on who's written depending on who's drawn the story, it's been depicted differently. Like, but presumably Adam had a certain color hair and Eve had a certain color hair. That doesn't mean that every hair color not featured in that story is is now like sinful and not permitted and such, right? Like
True. But
Adam probably had a hand that he preferred to write with, and so did Eve. That doesn't mean that the other hand is wrong to write with. And so the fact that in this story God has made Adam and God has made Eve doesn't mean that now no two men can ever have sexual relations. It just means that in this story it was Adam and Eve. Like that's not. Can you see how it's just because one thing exists? Like if Adam and Eve had chosen to play football, that wouldn't mean that like baseball is now banned, would it? Like, you know what I mean?
yeah, so I would agree with you if that's what Christians were doing, like they were just reading a descriptive account which describes the creation of Adam and Eve. And they were just like, oh, well, see, God made Adam and Eve, therefore that's all it can be. But that isn't the basis for it for Christians. It's later texts which are actually prescriptive in nature. And again, all this, you're right. I had a Christian, someone who's leaning towards Jesus, Tavos and Abri, who disagreed with me. He's wrong. I think he's wrong, and I can debate it on the Bible. But there are prescriptive texts which say, look, it's wrong. Homosexuality is wrong. And here's the basis. Paul even links it to the God created human beings to interlink only within this specific context, male, female, and in the context of marriage, kind of thing. And that's the only way that spiritual harm is not created according to the Bible.
But does God say again? It's the
What?
same thing, right? Like it's not the because you could argue these have been interpreted to say only, but it's the same thing. The fact that it says, "Oh, you must go forth and multiply, and marry and have, holy love and such," right? But that doesn't mean the same thing as you must never be gay, and if you're gay, it's evil and bad. Like that just mean like for instance, you could say, we live in times where many people are horrible and nasty. It's better to stay within a loving marriage because marriage means that you support Christian values and therefore are going to represent that with your own family. So it's not that the marriage is the only way to exist, and that if you don't marry the opposite gender, then you're evil and bad. It just means you could say, oh, well, actually, a lot of people in society do bad things, but you are Christian, which means you represent values of love and happiness and goodness and such. Therefore, it's better to stay with people who also share those values and not the others. And it was also, it's also not like I don't think even as explicit as saying, oh yes, gay people are evil and sinful, because you could argue that the things they're focusing on are the violence of the relationships in question, not the actual. In the same way that, like, if you read a text that said a Frenchman shot someone today, you would not focus on the French part, right? Like you wouldn't say, "Oh yes, France is now a nation of evil and sin." You'd focus on this individual. So in the same way, the people of the stories who maybe are doing bad things are the focus rather than the the now unrelated acts today, which are the same as any other act, that is also found across nature for people who like, it's not even as though um there's like, oh, it's only humans. It's just an actual part of life, right? Like if we're mammals, we're sexual creatures. We reproduce sexually. We have sexual desires. Therefore, because we're all just people, there's going to be all sorts of combinations that happen, and it's just part of life. So there's no like basis almost for saying, oh well, it's a sin just because someone has interpreted some verses that way. So, but even if we ignore all of that, because that is all still, that is all still just within the Christian elements of it. Not everyone's Christian, and if we're just going around saying things like, oh well, gay people are a sin, and it goes beyond the mind, goes beyond sort of the stuff, it's going to have that real world effect. And even if the most honest person ever said it and they're like, well, it's not going to affect anything else, it's still something that that gay person has to hear and deal with. And that's not okay. Like in the same way that if someone had a religious belief that black people were inferior, like that wouldn't be an okay thing just to go around saying in society. And so it's the same thing for anyone.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let me just ask this follow-up question. I'll let you get away with certain things here because I want you to get the last word. I'm interviewing you, but I'm just curious this way. Let's put it this way. Um, let's pretend I can prove to you that the correct interpretation is that the Bible teaches homosexuality or practicing homosexuality, to be as technical as and precise as possible, is immoral. Further, I prove to you on a balance of probabilities where you are convinced, based on evidence, that this command was uttered by a morally perfect God. Um, if I could establish those two elements, would you then be okay with saying, yeah, guess what? I was wrong this whole time. Practicing homosexuality is a sin, and yes, it offends people, but now I know, like, would that be an
So
acceptable way to change people's minds? I'm just trying to say,
so
like,
you're saying so the two premises are if you prove the Bible said 100% that practicing homosexuality is a
or,
sin, and the second premise is what was the second premise? Sorry, that if
and
it also
that command was issued by a morally perfect God.
so how are we defining morally perfect? Sorry, like where's because I would say, I mean it's a bit like saying if you could prove that murder was right and that murder was actually good, like it's if in this world I had a completely different worldview, then like I like it was almost like redundant, right? But okay, let's say that in this world, I'll accept your premises, right? Like so that the Bible says this, and now God has said it. I would then put the question to God. I'd say, well, hang on a second. What does the actions written in this biblical account have to do with just some average person's day who's got, a man with a husband, for instance? There's no, um, I would say reread the story again, because if
Okay.
we're focusing on, in the story, if there's abuse and rape and such going on, but you're choosing to focus on the gender of the two people, like that's almost like the detective. Like if the detective of the case comes back and says, "Oh well, they're gay," then I'd say, "Well, find a new detective because they're not focusing on the right bit." So I would still, I mean, maybe, and I don't want to sit right, sort of questioning the word of God, from your perspective. But yeah, I'd say, why are we? accepting this account. And ultimately, I think that's what we have to do with anything, right? Like, I think that's even in the scenario where you prove both those things, that still wouldn't make it okay to, people who've had no connection to a biblical account,
Hmm.
like,
Okay.
and I don't see how that connects. But I'm aware that answer maybe didn't quite fit what you were saying. I will still say that there's not we live in a society in which there's a long history of terrible things being done against LGBTQ people, for bogus reasons, and as a result, it's really important to think about the things that are said. So, even if your interpretation of this book is a certain way, like you've got to think, okay, me saying things like, "Oh, it's a sin,"
Hmm.
like does have a real world impact. And it's beyond just like if I said, "Oh, I don't think cricket's a fun game," which I don't agree with. I think cricket's fantastic. But if I said, I'm trying to think American, for example, now, if I said, "Oh, American football's not that good," like that is something someone can get past because it doesn't have any real world effects really. Like it's not as though me saying that's going to ruin someone's sports career, but someone saying what you said earlier, but it's sin and you shouldn't practice it, does have an effect on the average gay person, even in a small way, because even if it's just said once and you do nothing else to them again, that's still just something in their just something natural, something that's part of their life that has no negative effect in their life being targeted and attacked, and it can affect their job opportunities, it can affect their employment, their safety in society, and just their mental well-being, and it's just not nice. So yeah, I think there's lots of reasons. Even if I were to accept the argumentation you've made, which so I'd say I don't accept it. Um,
Okay.
there's no reason to go through life sort of
Interesting.
with that. Oh yes, I should be able to say it, and everyone should tolerate it as well.
Okay. Okay. So I will. I am mindful of the time. Do you have maybe like
Yes,
eight more
yeah.
minutes? If that's okay. Or
It's like sort of if we have like another 10,
yeah.
I've got about 10 more minutes, I'd say.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm going to end at 4:30 on my side. So, okay. So just one last sort of question. And I told you, so now let's talk about a view that both you and I would agree is an immoral opinion. It is an intolerant opinion, or it's a wrong opinion. I think you gave the example, I forget what you said, something about black people, like a racist belief about like being black is a sin or something like
Yeah,
that. Just
yeah.
would say, so let's use that. You and I would agree that's total nonsense. That's racist. But I would disagree with you. I would still think society needs that guy should not lose his job. Again, as if he has that sincere belief, he's wrong. It's an immoral belief. I would condemn him personally, but I wouldn't fire him from his job. I wouldn't say society, oh, he has to go to jail because he has this mistaken, racist, immoral belief. And here's the question that I want to get to you. Here's why I think you're wrong on all these things and you're being intolerant, immorally so and illegally so, in fact. It's my basis for when we interfere. When is a provable harm coming? When do we like mitigate somebody and take away their rights to free speech and stuff? In Canada, we have this thing called the Oaks test, right? So number one, you have to prove three things before we would even dare think of imposing our will on you and taking away your rights to have immoral, stupid beliefs. You're allowed to be an idiot. We have the freedom to do that, right? To be racist, whatever. And before you do that, so there's number one, you have to prove that a given statement or something like that, or beliefs or whatever, actually provably and directly lead to the harm being said. You can't go through indirect, circuitous. I said that wrong. Indirect means, such as the way you're doing with gays and stuff like that. I could have argued, well, tons of Christians are getting discriminated against. They're suicidal. I can prove all of the things you did with homosexuals applies to Christians if you don't let us say that about homosexuality and stuff, right? So it needs to be more direct proof that a court of law would recognize. Number two, the mitigation of your right has to be proportional to the with respect to the amount of damage that's being caused, right? So you limit the right only to sufficient degree to prevent that harm from coming about. You don't go overboard and, fire someone because they said something, I think being black is a sin. Should they lose their livelihood? Their children should be starving to death all because they said that stupid thing and stuff in their private, you know what I mean? And then there's a third thing that I'm forgetting right now, but there is a legal test, is what I'm trying to get, and I think that legal test is the proper basis. We've become on the left way too. If you just say anything I disagree with, even you know the most minor of things, you're fired. But yeah, I'll shut
I
up
mean,
and
I wouldn't say being black is a sin is a minor thing personally.
oh,
I would
sure.
say that I would question the ability of that person to be in many capacity jobs because, like, it's not as though when you exist in society when and you say things that has an impact, right? Like if you got onto a plane and the pilot said, "Hey, I don't actually believe in Newton's theory of gravity. I actually have my own way of doing it." Like, and then you see him going into the cockpit, like there's some doubt put in your mind. You think, okay, this is a curious fellow. Maybe they should be making announcements like that to the whole world. Maybe that's going to put people at risk. Um, and ultimately, racism is a social wrong, and it's not okay to have that in spaces in society. And so when someone's just openly saying this stuff, if it is just allowed to sit there unquestioned and just, or you can be racist and there's no societal consequence for it, then, you get more racist the next day and more and more and more. And then you end up with really bad situations. You end up back in, you're taking steps backwards and ending up in a time when, there's much, much more harm done to, in this case, black people, but any marginalized group that faces it. I enjoy not being around people that hold those views personally. And if like for as much as we can say, oh, it's just a view, it influences how you act, it influences how you treat people. And when we have those views in society, we end up with many situations where people get discriminated against. So it's firstly a preemptive measure. Secondly, in terms of a test, like you say there's like a test in Canada and such, that is still ultimately people applying it themselves subjectively in a court of law, right? Like the jury or the judge or whatever. Um, so you could still like if in this case like this guy's come out and said this and then they lose their job and it's gone to court or whatever, they can still say, okay, this person chose to make a load of racist comments and their employer said, well, we don't want to continue paying you. Like that's that's ultimately justified, right? Like you can't be racist and just expect everyone to still want to have you around. There's a consequence for how you behave. In terms of like their families starving and stuff, like that is um, a problem with the capitalist structures we were talking about earlier, rather than um, the consequence of racism, right? Because like if under our system, we're not. It's not again the difference between liberal and left here, right? Like we're not saying just do the societal action. We want everyone to have the material needs met, even if they're a horrible, nasty individual, right? So it's not the case that in, say, my society, if I had everything my way, I would say, okay, right, put this person to the dogs. They are now to be their whole family as well. No, but at the same time, there is a need for a consequence, right? You can't, if everyone just is allowed to say whatever they like and there's nothing ever that comes from it, then you're going to attract people and encourage people who have abhorrent views. And it's in our interest not to have that. Like if someone said something disgusting about like children, for instance, no one would have any problem saying, yeah, you shouldn't be in this position. So it's the same with any social ill. Racism is something which is not okay. And if you say racist stuff, then there's going to be consequences.
Yeah, yeah. So okay, so let me say walk some back as to what I said. So I think under the Oaks test, you're talking about criterion one, right? So if we have somebody in the context of on the job and they're saying something that's inappropriate that would adversely affect how they're doing their job. So, for example, okay, I work at the one of my atheist co-hosts gave this example about homosexual marriage and stuff, right? If I work at City Hall, it's my job to stamp approval for the marriages, and I'm just shouting around like, yeah, yeah, I don't believe in homosexual marriages. I'll never approve it or something like that. This is something that is directly impacting on my job performance. So in that front, absolutely, I can be fired for holding my beliefs. But in a different context, I think it's too remote. It's not a provable direct link. If, oh, I say, if I have my proven work record of every marriage that goes through, homosexual or not, I stamp it. I stamp the approval for it. But in a tweet, a private tweet, I said, "Oh, I don't believe in any of these gay people should be getting married. It's an abomination." I should not be fired for saying that in my private time of my private opinion, especially when I have a proven track record of it not affecting my job. So
Well, is it?
that's what I
But it's not
mean.
a proven track record, bro. And it's still that is still putting it out into the world, isn't it? Like if you've said these things, posted it on social media, like that's still like a public platform for one, and for two,
So
like it's still a negative, especially like if a government official, like if you're literally responsible for something which everyone has to use, and you're posting this stuff and you're saying these things, how on earth can someone say, okay, this person's character is someone we can trust to do the neutral acts of the state, right? Like I think, and because ultimately LGBTQ people are part of society, so that they should be able to participate without that sense of discrimination. And for as much as we can say, oh, well, you can say it for anything in our society where it's only very recently that LGBTQ people have had these rights, we can't be tolerating people just saying, oh, well, it's I don't like those gay people or whatever, and then just being able to just say that in their spaces and such. Like the idea, black people, I am very lucky. I've grown up long after the civil rights movement. In the UK, it was a little bit different because we didn't have quite the same segregation system as America did. But there's still plenty of racism to go around. I've benefited from living in a time that has not had the same open racism as previous generations because racism is bad and it's not good, even if someone, oh, I wouldn't ever act on it. It's still a negative thing to have in the world. And so it's the same principle. If you are found to have these views, if you post on social media or you've been mouthing off at the pub or whatever and saying all these horrible stuff, these horrible things, then yeah, of course, people are going to say, okay, well, the reaction to that now is, unfortunately, you're not going to be part of our team anymore because the things you've said cause harm, even in some small way, to others, and are unpleasant things incompatible with a society for all, which is what, ultimately, to go back to the religious element to it for a second, if God made all humans and all in his image, then that includes gay people. That's everyone. That's not just ones that some people like. It's all. So we can't have that idea that we can just discriminate against people, and it's okay because it's just my opinion. Like it's not okay. And I will say that I do unfortunately need to
yeah, no problem.
dash.
I was keep yeah, I was
So
yeah, no, I just want to say, yeah, thank you very much for coming on. And I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Like this is the way I think it should go, right? Like we sometimes we have disagreements and stuff like that, but we can talk it out respectfully, civilly, and calmly, and even strongly disagree. So, yeah, I hope you appreciated your time on your end.
yeah, I think it was nice. Like, I do wish that you. I mean, clearly you've got some views on gay people. It's a bit of a shame because I think it's like it's ironic that you would say that it's good to talk respectfully and stuff, and then say some of the stuff you did about gay people because other than that there wasn't like to me like it's LGBTQ people are part of society, and so I'd be gutted if they lost that place by virtue of being sort of called sinners and such just for them existing. So it's a shame, but apart from that, thank you for having me on, and yeah, thanks again for your time.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, you're welcome back anytime for any other topics you want. So, all right, take care. And just so everybody knows, next week, what do I have? I have no idea. I've got a bunch of stuff coming out, but yeah, check out Mike Lacona's channel. He interviewed me on the Shroud of Turin, and so you can see that up there. But otherwise, have a great week, everybody, and take care.